this is a solution put up by the state Labor members. We have enough police. We can't arrest our way out of this until we introduce a licence for having kids. Oh, there's the solution. Don't have any kids. That's the solution.
Good morning and happy Friday, everybody. My name's Nick Demetto, the State Member for Hinchinbrook, but also the Deputy Leader of the KAP. And this morning I'm here with you to do the Kaz Australian Party Re-KAP, where we keep you up to date on exactly what your Kaz Australian Party MPs have been doing every week while we're in our electorates, but also down there in state and federal parliament. And this week we'll kick off with what Bob's been up to. The Honourable Bob Katter has been down there in Parliament last week, but he's also showing a fair bit of concern of what's going on locally in Charters Towers right now, which is actually Bob Katter's hometown and where he still resides. So there's actually a project that has raised concern with residents, and it's basically been named Donga City, where they look to be building a large Donga-style accommodation very close to town, which is actually going to have a detrimental effect, Bob and the community is saying, to the fabric of Charters Towers. These sorts of projects in the past have had adverse effects, and especially on infrastructure and council infrastructure. When it comes to whether or not this project will have impact on the local government will now be up to the Charters Towers City Council, and I believe development approvals are sitting with them right now. Bob has also slammed the state government's response to youth crime and is opposing the idea of building a detention centre right in the middle of Cairns. This is something that does not have the KAP's support, and will always push relocation sentencing as our number one policy. These places should not be built in built-up areas in cities, but on remote locations where there would be a third option for magistrates when it comes to sentencing kids going through the youth justice system. He also slammed local Labor MPs making detrimental comments in regards to people not breeding anymore to help solve the youth crime problem.
In Cairns, 3.6 cars are stolen every day. This year, more than 1,000 cars have been stolen. In Townsville, over the next 12 or 15 years, statistically speaking, every single family will have their car stolen in Townsville. You must have the right to protect yourself in your own home, and that right has been taken off us. The most fundamental right in a democracy is that my fence is my land, not yours, Mr. Governments. You know, when you cross that fence, I am the king. And that's the wonderful thing about being an Australian. It was. Now, this is a solution put up by the Labor members. There's no Liberal members in North Queensland, but and thank God for that. But this is a solution put up by the state Labor members. We have enough police. We can't arrest our way out of this until we introduce a licence for having kids. Oh, there's the solution. Don't have any kids. That's the solution.
Robbie Katter has also had a number of engagements to attend this week, and we were very lucky to have him back in Townsville on Saturday night after a long week in Parliament. He shot home to feed the dog and play with the kids for 5 minutes, and he was back in Townsville for the Townsville Foster and Rehoming Animals Halloween Ball. That was on Saturday night, and it was an absolutely brilliant event. Heaps of money was actually raised for the Foster and Rehoming charity, and it was great to see the pavilion at the casino absolutely packed out. One of the biggest problems that Australians are facing right now, and especially here in Queensland, is the rising cost of electricity and the cost of producing electricity here in Queensland. And if Queensland had a national gas reserve policy from the start, we would have been able to make sure that we will be able to use the gas at a cheaper price rather than having to pay the world market prices that we are right now. We're at the whim of multinational companies, and Robbie Katter's done a lot of work on this and stood up for those seeking a cheaper gas price for cheaper energy costs.
So the KAP is calling on the government at both federal and state level to introduce a gas reserve policy finally. Stop tinkering around the edges and talking about having a code. We need a gas reserve policy, much like most other countries in the world. To preserve what little manufacturing base we have left, you need access to competitive energy, and one of those critical sources of energy is gas. Mount Isa Mine sitting here behind me, the copper smelter and copper refinery in Townsville, essentially need access to that gas, and the government needs the gas reserve policy in place for the first time in our history introduced so that we can keep these industries alive.
An absolutely devastating week in Parliament last week where a number of large water projects across Queensland either had their funding suspended from the federal government or projects that just aren't proceeding or going ahead because of the state government's inability to get these projects happening and off the line. Now, a number of things have happened with the Re-KAP project in Hell's Gate, but Robbie stood up in Parliament last week with a stirring speech, putting the Water Minister on notice. If you cannot allocate water in the state, what good are you as a state government water minister? And that's one of the biggest problems and one of the biggest hurdles that's holding back the Re-KAP project right now. An ability to take off a 3%, a small offtake of the water from the Flinders River system to ensure that we had water there in Hewenden to grow small crops and get into dry land agriculture would change the face of this small town. And the Queensland government is doing everything it can to hold us back. While Robbie Katter is in town this week, he took a chance to stop in here at the KAP studios to film his latest podcast talking about setting up a rural or a national bank here in Australia to combat the big four banks that have basically a monopoly over what's happening with banking here in Australia. He's saying that we shouldn't be going straight into competition with the big four, but we should definitely have a bank here in Australia that plays in the market and takes on the loan risks that the other big four banks don't want to. And that regional Queensland would be able to benefit from.
That's across the board, all the banks. And I think a lot of it goes back to, it's APRA, isn't it? The APRA guidelines that govern it, that protect the shareholders' funds, and they put some risks in there, and everything goes back on the balance sheet. So you can have, Rob Katter as the industry best practice standards. I'm a great farmer that does a great job, never missed a loan repayment, never will in my life. I'll live in a tent before I miss a loan repayment. And I've got the best land management practice, the most efficient farming, but old Freddie Bloggs next door can be drinking booze every night, send all his kids to expensive boarding school, inherited the property, but on the balance sheet, he looks better from an asset base, so he gets favoured by the banks rather than, and I go into a risk. They need to cut some of their loan book, and this happened during the drought. They said, well, we need to cut off 10% or whatever it was, the number of our loan book. So they knocked on Rob Katter's door and said, mate, we've got you've triggered some risk ratings, and we need to take you from 4% or 5% interest to 10 or 12. You need to tip in a few $100,000, so you have to sell all your cattle, which means you'll never dig yourself out of the hole. And that was the banker said to me, that's a place where a government bank, if they could cherry pick those sort of customers that are really good producers that just don't fit the traditional model, you'd have a great loan book, a good solid loan book, and history shows that you don't get defaults in those spaces. They're good, loyal customers, and it makes money for the taxpayer.
After a big week in Parliament, Shane Canoof's been back in the Hill electorate doing what he does best, and that's interfacing and getting out there and meeting with community members. And he took that opportunity over the weekend to meet with the Milla residents at the spring markets. If you haven't been up there before, you've got to go check this out. There's something for everyone at the Milla markets, and Shane Canoof had a chance to press the flesh and get up there and chat with a lot of the locals. Shane's been out there fighting for the community once again this week, and he stood up with the Upper Barron River residents to fight for upgrades to the Upper Barron River Road. Now, this road is a single lane, and this part of the highway actually poses an enormous risk to not only road users that are forced to get off the road for coming trucks, but also those school kids that sit on the school bus every day with the threat of having an accident while I'm going to and from school, which must be scary for some of these kids.
We can't believe that this is the year 2022 and this road has not been fully upgraded as yet. It's a single lane highway. Basically, it's a tourist route. It's well used by the community. It links the tablelands, and it's also a school bus route. And we've been pushing for this for quite some years now, and we're sort of saying, hey, the community's rising up. We're saying we had enough, and that's why we're coming here today to say enough is enough.
So everyone might have remembered this thing we had going on about 2 years ago that the state governments thought was pretty big, and that was the COVID pandemic. Now, as things have wound back almost completely with most of the restrictions across the state government last week in Parliament was hell-bent on just holding on to those powers a little bit longer. And they extended some of the Chief Health Officer's powers until October next year. These were supposed to run out at the end of last month in October, but they've extended them for another 12 months. Shane Knuth delivered a brilliant speech in Parliament standing up for those affected by the mandates, but also those small businesses that are affected by the restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the reality is there is still a lot of power left in the hands of the Chief Health Officer, and we believe it's just the state government, drunk on power, not willing to give it up.
Madam Speaker, I still don't know why we're still in the House debating on a bill that allows mandates to continue for another year. I am sure that every government member would have read and been briefed on the independent review in Australia's response to COVID-19 entitled False Lines, and I table it, Madam Speaker. This is an independent report that should be examined without prejudice. Madam Speaker, it is critical to understand that the problems with the government's overreach in the past in this debate because the same government is trying to make another mistake by extending the period for mandatory mandates.
Well, I guess it's that part of the Re-KAP where I get to talk about what I've been up to this week. And after a busy week in Parliament, delivering speeches on youth crime and asking questions to the state government regarding the cost of living and things like that, I got a chance to get back out in the community and meet with a number of people I hadn't seen for a while. And I did get a chance to join Robbie Catter as well at the Foster Rehoming Ball on Saturday night, which was a great chance to catch up for everyone. But on Sunday, it was this awesome event sponsored by the Cancer Council I got to watch. And there's a young Hinchinbrook lad named Kobe Chuntai. Now, he is a young student that goes to Bolivar State School, and he actually got involved in the ponytail chop, where he had grown his hair to the length where he could actually donate that to the Cancer Council so they could make prosthetics for people going through cancer treatment, but also raised just over $14,000. I think it's close to $15,000 actually, and it was an absolutely brilliant effort from a young man in Hinchinbrook. This week I got a chance to head up to Cardwell and do my monthly constituent meetings, and we talked about everything from dredging at Port Hinchinbrook through to how we could deliver better health services for people living in that part of the electorate. That opportunity also gave me a chance to get up to Upper Murray State School. Now, the primary school up there has got just over 40 students, and it was great to meet with the principal, Gemma, and talk to her about the great win that they've had recently. $138,000 will be delivered to this small state school in the Hinchinbrook electorate to ensure they've got new playground equipment. And for me, it doesn't matter if you're in a small school in Hinchinbrook or one of our larger schools, you should be all afforded the opportunity to learn and play in the same sort of environment. Yesterday, I faced the media in Townsville to discuss the KAP's next move on calling on the state government to do something serious about youth crime. And what we called on, and we have reaffirmed two things. We would like to see our relocation sentencing policy implemented by the state government. We want to see mandatory sentencing for unlawful use of a motor vehicle, break and enters and armed robbery from juveniles. But we've extended that now to we would like to see any of those juvenile offenders out there that are committing crimes like murder, rape, but also grievous bodily harm that leaves lasting injuries to their victims, to make sure they are tried as adults. These are adult crimes and you should be doing adult time. Now, there was a young boy murdered only a year and a half ago now. His name was Angus Beaumont. Now, this young lad, his perpetrators will only spend 3 to 4 years in jail for murder. Now, this is disgusting, and most Queenslanders would agree the youth justice system is only working for those that are committing the crime. Last week in Parliament, I got to ask a question without notice of the Health Minister. Now, the question we asked was when a CT scanner will be delivered to the Ingham Hospital so we can be diagnosing strokes and also making sure that we've got the right medical equipment to help the community when they need it most. We do have a private provider locally, but we need access to this type of machine during emergency hours. We'll continue to work, and we're currently seeking a meeting with the Minister, and hopefully soon we'll be able to bring the Community Advisory Network board from the hospital down to discuss with the Minister exactly why we need a CT scanner for Ingham. Later today I'll be up in the Hinchinbrook Shire again. In the middle of Ingham we'll be opening the new Dutton Street Bridge that will connect the two sides of the town during flood times to make sure that emergency services can get across the whole district during a flooding event up there in the Hinchinbrook Shire. This new bridge is going to be named quite proudly the Doug Lender Bridge. Doug actually passed recently. Very sad to hear about Doug's passing, but he actually provided 40 years of service to the local SES. The State Emergency Services Volunteer will be enshrined on a plaque as part of the naming of the bridge, but also have his name on the bridge for forever and a day, because the service that Doug provided to our community should be remembered forever, and it's an absolute honour to hear that we'll be opening the new bridge in Doug's name. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the Katters Australian Party recap for this week. It's been a pleasure catching up with you all once again. And before I go, I've been reminded that I haven't done any dad jokes lately, so here's one for you. So what did the ocean say to the shore? Nothing. It just waved. So see you later, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll see you all next week for Katters Australian Party recap. Cheers.